Burn them. Leave nothing standing. The order came through guttural and cold, spoken with the detached authority of something that had done this before, something that had wiped out entire species without hesitation. At once swarms of warships cut across the blackened void, descending toward the Europa colony with a silent promise of annihilation. They streaked through the atmosphere like obsidian blades, their hulls glinting under the distant sun, casting predatory shadows over the cityscape below. Arik Voss stood frozen, his breath locked in his chest, watching from Earth's orbital station as the first wave struck. Europa had been a thriving outpost, a cradle of human ingenuity in the outer reaches. Now it was a city drowning in fire. Flashes of white-hot energy lanced through the sky, reducing steel and stone to molten wreckage. Entire blocks collapsed in on themselves, breaking apart like fractured bones beneath the weight of relentless orbital bombardment. The air itself seemed to boil, superheated from the fusion detonations that cored into the planet's surface, leaving only charred husks where homes once stood. The civilian distress channels were a storm of raw panic. "We have unarmed children here. We owe God they're static." To anyone receiving, "We're evacuating to SEC." A shriek, a grinding collapse, silence. The screen before him crackled to life again. A live transmission, Europa's final moments. A man, clutching a small child, staggered into the frame, the terror in his eyes a reflection of the hell raining down behind him. Buildings folded under kinetic strikes, their reinforced supports buckling as entire skywalks twisted into flaming wreckage. Screams clawed through the air, desperate, futile. The child's face was pressed into his father's shoulder, but even through the distortion, the boy's sobs cut through like a blade. Then, the figures behind them stepped into view, hegemony soldiers, tall, monstrous in their armor, a metallic black that devoured the light. Their forms were fluid and methodical, weapons raised, movements absent of hesitation. The father turned, his arms curled around his son in a final, instinctive act. A human shield made of flesh and blood. A beam of energy lanced through him. He collapsed in an instant. The child tumbled free, wailing as his father's body crumpled. The soldier didn't pause. One pull of the trigger, the screen cut to static. A low, unnatural silence filled the war chamber. Not a whisper, not a shift in movement. The kind of silence that came when a man held his breath before pulling a trigger. Arik's hands gripped the edge of the control console, knuckles blanched white. His pulse pounded like war drums in his ears, like a countdown to something unstoppable. Then the hegemony broadcast flickered across every screen. An alien commander draped in ceremonial insignias regarded them with the composure of a god addressing insects. "Your species is a threat to stability. You will not be missed." The transmission cut. Arik exhaled slowly, steadying himself against the rage pooling in his veins, thick and suffocating. He didn't speak. No one did. The weight in the air was unbearable, the kind of heaviness that felt like a funeral before the body had even gone cold. A tremor coursed through his jaw before he forced his voice out, low and tempered. "Patch me through." Technicians scrambled, fingers dancing across consoles, faces pale. Red warning sigils blinked across the displays, marking every colony that had gone dark in the last hour. The system held its breath as Earth's channel connected. The United Coalition stood at attention, their expressions carved from stone. Generals, commanders, intelligence officials, every key power, waiting, listening. Arik straightened, the ghost of Europa's screams still rattling against his skull. He didn't hesitate. No more negotiations. The words cut through the air like steel on bone. No more diplomacy. Every eye in the room locked onto him. He inhaled once, deep, slow. No more mercy. The signal transmitted across the stars. The last message humanity would ever send before the war began. The screen went black. Silence fell again, but it was different now. This time, it wasn't grief. It was the quiet before the storm. The kind of silence that meant something was about to die. And it wouldn't be us. A war begins long before the first shot is fired. It festers in silence, concealed behind locked doors, whispered in council chambers where men and women weigh the value of life against the calculus of war. In that silence, humanity's true power had been waiting. The war room remained deathly still after the final transmission. It was not the stillness of defeat. It was the coil of a blade drawn back before the killing stroke. Arik Voss stood at the center of it all, his expression carved from something harder than steel. The screens around him pulsed with real-time losses. Europa was gone. Callisto wiped out. Arcadia reduced to nothing but ruin. Millions dead in a single sweep. Their names weren't just data entries. They were ghosts pressing against his ribs, demanding vengeance, a controlled inhale. He turned sharply. "Status on our fleet." A lieutenant adjusted his headset. Voice clipped and clear. "All strategic assets in position. Blacksite Manufacturing confirms Valkyrie is operational. Echelon 9 is running full-spectrum diagnostics. Predictive combat efficiency estimates at 96%. Aric's jaw clenched. "What's the margin of error?" A pause. The room tensed. The lieutenant hesitated, then answered, "None." No disbelief, no shock, only the final acknowledgement of a war already won before it had begun. For decades, Earth had pretended to be weak, hiding behind treaties and trade agreements, feigning dependency on alien technology. That illusion had been humanity's most powerful weapon, an entire war machine built beneath the galaxy's notice. No one had ever questioned why Earth's colonies were built like fortresses. No one had suspected that civilian freighters were capable of deploying orbital-class weaponry in under 2 minutes. No one had asked why every system of government, finance and communication was redundantly hardened against external influence. They had all thought humanity was playing by the rules. They had no idea we wrote them. "Begin Phase 1. Aric's voice was low, the sentence cutting through the tension like a blade. The operation had no name. It didn't need one. This was not an invasion. It was not even a counterattack. It was retribution. Across the solar system, signals flared to life, embedded within the deepest sectors of space, encoded in dead transmissions, hidden in the white noise of innocuous signals. One by one, silent triggers awoke entire fleets buried beneath planetary crusts, concealed in abandoned asteroid fields, masked beneath defunct infrastructure, labeled obsolete. And just like that, Earth was no longer alone. A fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen began to move. No grand displays, no posturing. The hegemony had shown its arrogance when it sent a fleet broadcasting its presence for all to see. Humanity did not make the same mistake. Aric's gaze flicked to the secondary monitor. There, the first wave of silent death unfolded. Out beyond the orbit of Mars, the hegemony's forward patrols remained unaware. Their ships hovered in idle formation, oblivious to the shadows shifting around them. Then, in the space of a single breath, they began to die. Their ships didn't explode. There were no energy discharges, no nuclear flashes of combat. Instead, their systems simply failed. Weapons deactivated mid-charge, shields dropped as if surrendering, navigation consoles flooded with conflicting data, until pilots found themselves staring into the nothingness of dead control panels. The fleet, once so confident in its position, began drifting helplessly into the void. Aric knew what they were experiencing, the slow, creeping horror of losing control. "Confirm AI lockdown," he ordered. A security analyst nodded, eyes never leaving his terminal. "Echelon 9 has full override. All enemy vessels neutralized. Shall we proceed?" Aric exhaled. "No." The analyst hesitated. "Sir, let them drift." A quiet ripple passed through the room. No one questioned the order. They understood. The soldiers of the hegemony, so proud, so assured in their dominance, would not be granted the dignity of a swift execution. They would float, trapped within their own lifeless warships, watching helplessly as Earth burned their empire to the ground. It was the first lesson in a war that had only just begun. A notification flickered across the main screen. Project Valkyrie was ready. Aric turned to Admiral Darion Hask, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The older man finally spoke, voice carrying the weight of a long-awaited inevitability. Time to let the wolves out. And so the second wave began, out beyond the reach of any known star charts. From the dead zones of human-mapped space came the warships, not sleek, not elegant. These ships were built for one purpose alone. They did not glide, they hunted. Valkyrie-class cruisers surged through the dark like predators breaking from a cage. Their hulls absorbed the light, rendering them specters against the void, shapes seen too late, shadows of oncoming annihilation. Hegemony command had no warning. One moment, their tactical readouts displayed an empty system. The next, an entire fleet of human warships was upon them. The first strikes did not come from weapons, they came from within. Hegemony battle cruisers shuddered violently, internal systems failing one by one. Artificial gravity reversed in some decks, slamming soldiers against bulkheads. Environmental controls purged oxygen from sealed compartments, turning warships into airtight tombs. The hegemony did not realize that the AI controlling their systems had never been theirs to begin with. Echelon 9 had not hacked them tonight. It had been inside their infrastructure for years. By the time the first plasma cannons finally ignited, it was already over. In that moment, Arik Voss knew what the hegemony was feeling. Not just defeat, not just fear. They were experiencing something deeper, something primal. The slow, agonizing recognition of being prey. And the hunt had just begun. Darkness had always belonged to humanity. The hegemony had spent centuries ruling in open arrogance, flooding the stars with their banners, enforcing their will under the pretense of order. But now their dominion was rotting from within. They had declared genocide against the one species that had mastered war long before they had even crawled into space. Arik Voss stood motionless, his gaze locked onto the live feeds streaming in from Echelon 9's battlefield surveillance. What had once been an unbreakable hegemony fleet now drifted in fractured ruin. Human forces had torn through fortified sectors in silence, their warships descending like specters into enemy space, annihilating entire divisions before a single distress call could be made. Hegemony capital ships lay motionless, paralyzed in place. Their crews had no idea that their systems had been hijacked years before the war had even begun. Now they sat inside their own war machines, prisoners waiting for judgment. Open a channel to their command. The transmission linked immediately. The delay, the protocol negotiations, the layers of security, all had been bypassed. The hegemony had never understood how deep the knife had already been buried in their spine. The screen flickered, revealing Praetor Yevath. Once a figure of dominance, he now looked like a man standing at the edge of his own grave. The dark plates of his armor no longer gleamed. Instead, they bore the stains of a crumbling empire. Behind him, officers moved in panicked urgency, their voices strangled with disbelief. Arik did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, let Yevath feel the weight of it, the kind of stillness that marked the last breath before execution. "I assume you understand your position," Arik said finally. Yevath's mandibles clicked in frustration, his skin pulsing with the dull hues of suppressed rage. The hegemony did not surrender. It had never needed to. There had never been a power strong enough to force it. "You were meant to be wiped from existence." Yevath spat, his tone cutting through the tension like a rusted blade. "Yet here you stand, speaking as if you dictate the fate of this war." The shadow of a smirk touched Arik's lips. "You think this is a war?" His voice was even steady, lethal. "This is a funeral. You just haven't been buried yet." Yevath exhaled sharply, the ridges of his skull tightening. He was afraid. They all were. The ones who had ordered humanity's extinction were now watching their empire fracture beneath their own feet. "Our fleets remain operational," Yevath pressed. "The hegemony is far from broken." Arik didn't blink. He merely turned to one of his tactical officers and gave a single nod. The order was wordless, immediate. And then it happened. On Yevath's screen, the hegemony commander watched his own forces vanish in real time. Entire fleets, warships the size of cities, collapsed into nothingness, their cores imploding in orchestrated detonations. Dozens of sectors went dark simultaneously, as if the stars themselves had been snuffed out. Yevath staggered, gripping the edge of his console. He turned sharply, barking orders in his native tongue, but the response came too late. They had lost entire divisions in the time it took him to draw breath. Arik tilted his head slightly. "Operational, you said." The silence that followed was not the silence of strategy. It was the silence of a man, realizing that his entire civilization had already been gutted. "We never wanted this war," Yevath growled, though the bravado in his voice was unraveling. "We sought only stability." "You sought genocide," Arik corrected. "And now you beg." The room behind Yevath descended into chaos. Reports flooded in from every remaining hegemony outpost. Humanity had not only taken their military assets, but had collapsed the very infrastructure that held their empire together. Entire planetary defense grids had been rewritten. Industrial sectors were paralyzed, war factories stood lifeless. The hegemony had never known fear before this moment, now it drowned in it. "What do you want?" Yavath's voice was quieter now, his arrogance unraveling thread by thread. Eric leaned forward slightly, the ghost of Europa still burning behind his eyes. "I want you to suffer," he said. And then he cut the transmission. Yavath did not know it yet, but his fate had already been sealed. The hegemony would not die in one swift stroke. No, it would rot, system by system, world by world, until nothing remained but the echoes of an empire that had once called itself invincible. A message had been sent to every surviving alien faction, watching from the sidelines. The ones who had stood silent when Earth burned, the ones who had whispered among themselves, debating if humanity's extermination had been justified. They had watched the hegemony fall, and now they asked the same unspoken question: what happens if we are next? That question was the true victory, because fear was a weapon sharper than any fleet, and Eric Voss had just rewritten the balance of power in the galaxy. This war was no longer about survival, it was about making sure that no species would ever again dare to raise a weapon against Earth, not while a single human still breathed. Yovath had stopped speaking. His transmission had ended, but the silence he left behind was deafening. Eric Voss stood in the war chamber, his mind a cold machine dissecting the battlefield in real time. The hegemony was unraveling, crumbling beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Entire fleets lay crippled, their commanders trapped in dead warships that no longer obeyed their commands. Planets once locked in the iron grip of their empire stood abandoned, their puppet rulers either dead or desperately pleading for sanctuary from the very species they had once called vermin. And yet, it was not over. The true architect of the genocide still remained, Overlord Exathian, a ghost that had lurked in the background, hidden behind veils of bureaucracy and distance. His hands had never dirtied themselves with war. Others carried out his decrees, slaughtered at his command, erased civilizations in his name. Arik would make sure his reign ended with his own blood staining the ground. "Where is he?" Lorian Cade's voice cut through the tension. Earth's intelligence director, always the one to see through the smokescreens, stood at the edge of the chamber, his sharp gaze locked onto the surveillance feeds cycling through intercepted hegemony transmissions. Our infiltration teams tracked Exathian's command vessel to the Talsharan system. Cade answered, "He's moving, running. He knows we're coming." Arik studied the screen, watching the broken network of retreating ships scattering like hunted prey. But there was no place left to run. "Prepare the assault," Arik ordered. Hask, standing at the strategy table, exhaled through his nose. A direct strike would be expected. "He'll have contingency plans. We need to hit him where he won't see it coming." Arik glanced at Cade. "Tell me we have leverage." A slow smile curled at the intelligence director's lips. "Better, we have his entire command code archive." A hush swept through the room. Exathian had operated under the belief that his intelligence network was untouchable, that no outside force could breach his encrypted transmissions or decipher the layers of false data he had woven into the hegemony's infrastructure. He had never considered the possibility that Earth had been inside his systems for years. "We can burn every contingency he has before he even executes them," Cade continued, tapping into the console. "His emergency warp beacons, gone. His planetary defense overrides, deleted. His backup fleet routes, scrambled." Arik processed the implications in a single beat. "Then we don't need to fight him. We just need to take away every choice except surrender." He turned to the assembled War Council. "Deploy Echelon 9. Every single asset. I want Exathian to feel this closing around him like a noose." Orders rippled through the fleet. Out in the void, humanity's final stroke began. Exathian's flagship, the Veil of Dominion, burned through the Talsharan system, its escorts breaking formation as panic surged through their ranks. The empire they had served was already dead. They knew this, yet they still ran, still clung to the illusion that they could escape what was coming. A futile dream. The first system-wide shutdown hit like a silent tidal wave. All hegemony-controlled orbital satellites collapsed, turned into useless husks by Echelon 9's relentless assault. Weapon platforms went inert. Communications flickered and died. A few officers tried manual reboots, emergency protocols, fallback sequences. None of them worked. Every line of defense had already been rewritten. Inside his private chamber, Overlord Exathian watched it happen. His hands, once steady with the confidence of untouchable power, trembled against the console. "This is impossible," he murmured. His screen flashed with a transmission, an unmarked signal, cutting through the remnants of his encrypted defenses as if they were nothing but paper shields. Arik's voice filled the chamber. "Your empire is gone, Exathian." The Overlord's breath came shallow. He was a man who had always spoken with certainty, who had dictated the fate of entire civilizations with a single decree. Now he had nothing to say. "Surrender," Arik continued, his voice neither cruel nor triumphant, just absolute, "or we take you apart, piece by piece." Exathian's mind raced. The war wasn't over, not yet. There were still pieces left to play. The hegemony had been vast. There had to be something left to salvage. He turned sharply, issuing a command to his remaining officers. "Send the Omega protocols to." Nothing happened. His systems refused to respond. It was then, in that frozen moment, that he truly understood. He had already lost. Even his final desperate gambits had been stolen from him before he could play them. A sharp, cold sound rose from his throat. A laugh, not of amusement, but of utter disbelief. He had spent his life controlling the galaxy, ruling from his unreachable throne. Now, he had been reduced to nothing but a cornered man in a dying empire, and he knew exactly how this would end. Arik's voice cut through the silence once more. "Your genocide failed. Your war failed. And now, you will die for it." Exathian straightened, his pride refusing to collapse with the rest of him. "If I am to fall," he said, voice eerily calm, "then I will take something with me." Arik narrowed his gaze. "You have nothing left to take." Exathian's eyes gleamed. "Are you certain?" A new alarm burst across the fleet's command center. An intercepted energy spike, a planetary core destabilization. Hask's head snapped toward the nearest officer. "What the hell just happened?" Exathian triggered a failsafe, the analyst reported, voice sharp. "He's collapsing Tal's Heron IV's entire planetary core. If he can't escape, he's making sure none of us leave either." The war room erupted in motion. Arik's mind locked onto the calculations flashing across the screen. Exathian had initiated a controlled singularity cascade. A gravitational implosion that would consume everything in the system, including every human fleet, positioned around the target zone. It wasn't a military counterstrike, it was a last act of defiance. A final, twisted monument to the empire he had lost. Arik's pulse steadied. This was it. The final battle had begun, and this time, the Overlord would not walk away from it. Exathian's final act of defiance had begun. The singularity detonator embedded in Tal's Heron IV's core had already fired. Gravitational forces surged through the planet's crust, rupturing entire fault lines, swallowing cities in molten ruin. The planet was dying. Everything within the system would be consumed. But Arik Voss didn't flinch. His mind dissected the chaos in real time. A tactical officer shouted projected timelines, 15 minutes before collapse. Ships scrambled, engines firing in desperation, but there was no outrunning a gravitational implosion this size. This was exactly what Exathian wanted. If he was to be erased, he would drag Earth's forces with him. Arik's gaze locked onto the transmission still flickering before him. Exathian sat in his command throne, a twisted smirk settling across his features, as if savoring the moment. "You expected me to beg," Exathian said, voice sharp with bitter amusement. "You thought I would die on my knees." Arik stepped forward, his expression carved from something colder than steel. "No. I expected you to die screaming." And with those words, he cut the feed. "Cade." Arik's voice was sharp. "Override his core detonator. Find a way to kill that singularity before it collapses this entire system." Cade's fingers moved in a blur across his console, already inside his grid. It's no longer just a failsafe. He's hardwired it into every planetary relay. We can't stop it. Arik's jaw clenched. Then we don't stop it. We control it. The war room snapped to attention. Hask's brow furrowed. You're suggesting we collapse it on our terms. Arik nodded once. We shape the event, redirect the pull, make it consume only what we choose. Cade exhaled sharply, considering. If we reconfigure Echelon 9's network alignment, we might be able to reroute the gravitational force using the hegemony's own planetary stabilizers. Do it, Arik commanded. Seconds later, an entire fleet mobilized. Earth's warships cut through the debris-strewn system, every movement coordinated, every maneuver calculated. Their weaponry was not aimed at enemy ships, but at key planetary relays. One by one, controlled detonations erupted across the planet's surface. The hegemony's stabilizers, designed to balance tectonic shifts, were hijacked and inverted. Their own engineering was turned into a weapon against them. As the singularity pull surged, Earth's forces manipulated its trajectory. The implosion, once a force of indiscriminate destruction, was being shaped into something surgical. Jathian's fleet, still locked in battle, had no escape. Their engines fought against the pull, but the void was already claiming them. Warships tilted, dragged off course. Metallic hulls screamed under the strain, warping, collapsing inward as they spiraled into oblivion. Jathian watched his empire die. His officers shouted over one another, panic splintering through his command deck. The walls trembled as gravitational forces began to tear at the ship's core. He pressed commands into the console, but nothing answered. His power, his empire, had been hollow all along, and now it was devouring itself. Arik Voss stood in silent observation as the Overlord's ship tilted into the gravitational maw. No escape pods fired, no rescue fleets emerged. Jathian had ruled with absolute dominance, believing himself untouchable. Now he was nothing but a casualty of his own arrogance. His final transmission cut through the dying system. Voss. Arik exhaled slowly. Go ahead, say something worth remembering. Static crackled. Then Jathian's voice, strained but sharp. You will become what you destroyed. A pause. Arik let the words settle for a breath. Then his response, steady, final. No, we will become something greater. And then Jathian was gone. His ship collapsed inward, swallowed in the gravitational storm, vanishing into the singularity's endless pull. It was over. The hegemony, the architects of genocide, were no more. Across the war room, officers released breath. They hadn't realized they were holding. Some clenched fists in quiet triumph. Others simply stared at the screen, at the final flickering remnants of an empire that had once called itself eternal. Arik let his gaze drift over them, then turned sharply. Hask. Status on all remaining hegemony assets. The Admiral's voice carried weight. Every last fleet has either surrendered or been neutralized. Cade straightened, scanning the final transmission logs. We've confirmed it across every major stronghold. No surviving command. No remaining contingency plans. Arik nodded once. Then we moved to the next phase. The war was won. Now came the reckoning. Earth's forces did not retreat. They did not return home. They stayed. In the wake of the hegemony's destruction, a new order was forged. Every world that had stood silent while Earth burned was now forced to answer for its complacency. Every government that had signed treaties, nodded in cowardly compliance while humanity was marked for extinction, now stood before tribunals led by the very species they had abandoned. The Arik Voss Accord was signed across the galaxy, not as a peace treaty, as a warning. Humanity would not rule. They did not claim territory, did not demand tribute. They had no interest in conquest. But the message was clear. Genocide will never happen again. If it does, we will return. The final scene unfolded on a world that once belonged to the hegemony. A surviving alien ambassador, still bearing the insignia of a crumbling empire, stood before a human envoy. His voice was tight with fear. And if we resist, the envoy, not a soldier, not a warlord, just a diplomat wearing the emblem of Earth, smiled without warmth. Then we finish what we started. The camera pulled back, revealing thousands of Earth's warships suspended over 100 alien worlds. They did not fire. They did not threaten. They simply remained, watching, waiting, ensuring that history would never repeat itself. And in every shadowed corridor, in every council chamber across the galaxy, one truth settled deep into the marrow of those who had once mocked humanity. No more negotiations. No more diplomacy. No more mercy.